So for those of you I've not met before, my name is Fran Stovold. I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Dr. Justine Reilly, who is Director of Sporting Heritage. And between us, we're going to do a walkthrough of how to set up a virtual visit for your collection. This is the fourth of our series of Welsh Significance Programme sessions. The first three are ready to review up on our YouTube channel and via our website. You can view them as standalone sessions or you can watch them in order. Our fifth and final session will be running in a fortnight's time, which will be looking at the role of the peer reviewer and how you would come in and peer review somebody else's collection. So the first four we've covered as if you were going through the significance process yourself. And our final one is if you're brought in as a peer reviewer to support somebody else's collection. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get started. Closed captions are enabled for this session, so if you would like to toggle them on or off, that's the CCs in a little round square box that should appear on your Zoom toolbar, either on the bottom or the side, depending on how your tools display. We are recording the session, so you're welcome to keep your cameras off or on, whichever you're most comfortable with, and I will be diving into a slide deck for most of the session as well. If you have any difficulties with your Wi-Fi or connection and drop out of the session, we'll keep an eye on the waiting room and let you back in as soon as we can. So I think that's all that I need to cover to begin with. Justine, could you just start with a bit of a background to the Welsh Significance Programme, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we were very generously funded by the Welsh Government to deliver a programme of significance over last year and this year. And by that meaning significance of collections in terms of loads of different criteria. So that could be the historical significance, or it could be the social significance, aesthetic, lots of different ways that collections could be measured to demonstrate why they're important to different people and different geographical remit. So that work, we did a pilot project last year where we developed some significant resources that would help different organisations look at their collections and be able to assign that significance. And the reason why that's important for us is that we understand more about those collections, what exists, and the significance of them. And for you and as different organisations, that's really important to understand your collections and know really clearly why they're important. And people are using that for different ways. Sometimes it's for demonstrating within their own organisation why it's important. Sometimes it's for accessing funding. And sometimes it's just to understand more about where the gaps are and understanding what they need to do next or what they don't know about their collections as much as what they do. So that significance project happened last year and is happening again now. And this training is part of the delivery of that because it's the parts of the gaps that we've worked out. What do people really need and want from us to be able to support them to look at their collections and assign that significance. What we've really noticed is that within the peer review process, sometimes there are things that can make it quite difficult and can take quite a lot of time for peer reviewers to understand more about those collections. And this session today is to try and help with some of that and to help you as organisations do that really straightforwardly without it taking a lot of capacity or a lot of time, because we know that they're real big issues in terms of measuring significance while you're trying to also do the day job. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's why we're doing it. And that's what this session is kind of contextualised within.
Lovely. Thanks, Justine. Right, I'm going to dive into the slide deck. As you know, these are only hour-long sessions, so we will move at quite a pace. There will be an opportunity towards the end for us to have questions and to discuss as a group how you think this sort of approach might work for your organisation and for your collection. But for the most part of the session, we're going to look at how we can put something together that's manageable, suits your capacities, and doesn't require you having to go and learn a whole new raft of skills. So just bear with me while I dive back into the slide deck. So, by the end of today's session, I'm hoping that we will have a shared understanding of why we might need to set up a virtual visit for our peer reviewers, to understand what the scope might be within a virtual visit, the sort of things that your peer reviewer might want to see from your collection, and also what you think would be useful that you can't communicate maybe through your paperwork, that actually a film or a photograph might be able to give that peer reviewer the vital information they might need to respond, and to understand how to do this within your time and resource capacity. So, as with the whole of this session and the whole of our programme, it has an overarching framework that sits around it. There is a large collection significance assessment toolkit that was commissioned by the Welsh Government on that top link. The Sporting Heritage Measuring Significance Toolkit, which draws from the overarching Welsh one, which has specifically been put together and supports these 5 sessions that we're working through at the moment, is on the second link. And for those of you within the museums sector, all of our work is bound by their code of ethics. Justine, can I call on you just to talk about the difference in the 3 museums who came through the pilot project, please?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we purposefully went for different types of museums to see what the issues were for those collections in terms of measuring significance, and also what we could do to make that more straightforward going forward. So the Museum of Welsh Cricket was subject specific, so it was just a sports museum. Torfaen Museum that had a club collection within a local authority museum, and Swansea Museum was a very broad collection that obviously had lots of other collections that weren't sport, but then had about 20 sports collections within the museum as well. So lots of different ways of dealing with sport, but that also meant that there were lots of different ways of accessing the knowledge. So the Welsh Cricket and the Torfaen Museum had lots of access to subject specialists who knew about the sport, and so could, when it got to the peer review stage, as well as within the significance assessment, they had a real understanding about where they could fit within that significance framework. Whereas with Swansea Museum, because they weren't subject specialists and they had such a broad collection, that was far more tricky for them, because it was difficult to identify who were the peer reviewers. So part of this kind of next pilot stage is trying to deal with that, because the majority of collections will be within those local authority museums that have got a wealth of different sporting collections, and they won't have time to go and work out who are all the different peer reviewers, what would that look like, without having a lot of support in place. But we also know that this is really valuable for those who have got sporting collections as a sport specific or as a club, because we know that the peer reviewers were also asking, oh, can we see more of the collection? Could we understand more about this part of it, for example? So the reason why we're then trying to work out and give you as many tools as we possibly can to go, so what could that look like in a really straightforward way? Yeah, it's because of what we learned from that.
Lovely, thanks. And you can read on the hyperlink at the bottom of that slide, you'll be able to read the evaluation report from that first round. And as Justine says, we're going through the second iteration of supporting a cohort of museums in Wales through the significance process, all supported by the Welsh Government. Now, for transparency, we should say that, as far as I'm aware, and Justine, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, that none of the 3 who went through the first pilot set up formal virtual visits, but it was identified as a mechanism that would have helped, particularly museums where they had peer reviewers who were not geographically close to them, a way that it would really help and support some of those gaps. So although it wasn't necessarily something that was trialled within that first pilot, it was identified as a gap. Justine, would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something, when people were asking about the collections, it was definitely something I was thinking that could be a way of solving those issues fairly straightforward and low cost.
Okay, well, let's look at how we might go about doing it. Right, if I can get my slide deck to move on. So what do we mean by a virtual visit? And I'd love to say that by the end of this hour, you will have all the skills and knowledge you need to produce this high, glossy tour of your collection. But in practical ways, that's not what we're asking you to do. And it's definitely not what your peer reviewers will be expecting. So what we mean by a virtual visit is it's a way to provide access to your collection without your peer reviewer having to visit in person. And it could be a way that you could add additional information into your collection documentation. I'm a big fan of doing one job that might support another area of your work. You don't have to put it into your collection documentation, but if you're looking at your collection close up, either going back and photographing or filming it in any way, that could be a really useful record for yourselves as much as the peer reviewer. But it's to provide information that your peer reviewer will need. It is not aimed for public consumption. So it doesn't have to be fully branded. It doesn't have to have a perfect script. It doesn't have to have, Hollywood style lighting and scenes set up within it. It's for conveying information, and it shouldn't be a task that takes up hours of your time or require your peer reviewer to spend a lot of their time reviewing footage or photographs. It is simply a mechanism of you being able to convey things for those peer reviewers who would like to know more about your collection, or if they come back and question things within your paperwork and go, so exactly what does that look like? Can you show me that? So what are the benefits of offering a virtual visit? As I say, it's to provide additional vital information for your peer reviewers. Ideally, you would have sort of 3, 4, maybe 5 peer reviewers working on and reviewing and commenting on your significance statement. So there's a very good chance that not everybody will be geographically close to you. It will help build their confidence so that they know that they can write their response having a really good solid grounding. Sometimes when you look at everybody's paperwork, you have a feel for the collection, but it's, unless you're familiar with the collection yourself, you may have sort of a little bit of reticence or feel a little unsure about what you're commenting on. So to be able to see things, it's the classic thing of, a picture tells 1,000 words. You can get a much better feel for it if you can show something visual, and hopefully that will then allow them to respond with greater confidence. And with the whole of this process, we hope that you will get something out of it as well by setting up this process. It will give you an opportunity to maybe look at your own collection with fresh eyes, because maybe the questions that your peer reviewers are asking, possibly things that you've not thought about your collection, or you've not had to get this particular item out of store or take it out of your displays for a long time. So it's looking at how it can be a mutually beneficial activity to undertake. So I think the best way to set up a virtual visit so that it's within your capacity and resources is to establish the needs of your peer reviewer. And the simplest way to do that is to talk to them. So each reviewer's needs will be different. Some might want to get a feel for the overall collection. Some might want to see particular groups of items. Some might be quite sort of detail focused and want to look at either wear and tear or maker's marks or the way something has been damaged, all sorts of detail that sits within your collection that adds to the story of the people and the sport that they relate to. They also might need their visit at different times in the review process. So you may think, you may want to pass over all your paperwork, give them time to review it, and then they come back to you and they say, well, actually, could you send me, could we do a virtual visit around these particular items? Or they may feel that they want, particularly if they want to have an overall feel of your collection, they may want, overall shots of either where you've got it displayed or where you've got it stored. So while they're looking through the paperwork, they've got that picture in their mind. So it's working out when works best for you and when works best for your peer reviewer. And as I say, as we're all different people will want it at different times. So establishing the outcomes. As I say, the best thing to do is to have a very open discussion with your peer reviewers about what they would like to see. Would they find a virtual visit beneficial? You may find peer reviewers happy to look at the paperwork alone, so you may not need to go down this route, but you will find that some will want to have that extra information. Be very clear about what your skills and capacity are. It's very easy to sort of overpromise, particularly when somebody is doing something that will contribute and something really valuable to your process, like the comments that will come back from the peer reviewers. But just being really clear about what you can send them or what you can set up for them, and be realistic about the formats and the sort of information. So I think if you can have that very open discussion when you are first speaking with your peer reviewers and say, this is a possibility that we can set up a virtual visit. If you let me know when it's best for that to happen, if you would like it to happen, we can set something up at the museum and we can talk about the sort of elements that might go into it. One thing I will caution against is and again, this is around sort of over promising, or because it's all very well and good saying, oh well, I'll get the collection out of store, but as we all know, getting items out of store or getting items out of display cases and then setting up, as you'll see, the process of the visit as we go through today's session, and then returning them all is a hugely time-consuming task. And sometimes it's not even a one-person task. You may need to pull in other people from your team. So it's working out if you have the space and time. So as I say, I really emphasize being clear about what your capacity is around this. So thinking about how you might deliver a virtual visit, we're not asking you to invest in fancy equipment at all. A smartphone or a tablet is sufficient. You can use them either in a handheld, if you've got steady hands, you can do just a handheld photographs and films, or you can invest in a tripod or even a ring light if you've only got dark spaces, and prices for those start online from about £20 upwards. So hopefully setting up a virtual visit will not incur you loads of additional cost. So looking at methods and approaches, there are lots of different ways that I've sort of thought through that we could approach doing the virtual visit, and I'm hoping that there'll be enough of a selection that you will, by the end of today's session, work out what works best for you, and then when you speak to your peer reviewers, when that time comes, you will be able to offer them sort of a menu, as it were, of how you could send them information. It broadly breaks down into photographs and films, but there are ways of manipulating those for different outcomes. So I would always recommend that if you're going to send photographs, that you send them as a high-res JPEG or a TIFF format, so that they're really good quality. The peer reviewer can zoom in to them and interrogate them to see the detail. And you can either send them as individual files, so you can either email them, or we'll talk about sort of sharing photographs and films towards the end of this session, or you could do almost what I'm doing today, which is put them in a PowerPoint presentation. Then that would give you the opportunity to add a little bit more information in. Either way, you need to make sure that you either rename your image files or put captions under your slides, not only so that you know what you've sent, but also so that the peer reviewer can reconcile the images that you're sending them against any lists or collection data that you've already included in your significance paperwork. There's nothing more frustrating than looking at a photograph and saying, oh well, I think it's this bit of kit, and then having to scan through a whole list to link it to the description on the database. I'm hoping that everybody's collections do have a unique number that's attached with each item. Obviously, if you're following all the museum standards, we'd call that an accession number. But if you're not using any numbering system, I would recommend that you have some way of identifying and tying those, either an image together with what is on your list. And we would always recommend that you're at least at you've got your collection listed on what we would call within the museum world inventory stage before you embark on the collection significance process as a whole. So if you want a little bit of advice on how to photograph your collections, I won't play this video now, but it's embedded in the slide deck, so you'll be able to watch it at your leisure. This is one from the Australian Museums and Galleries Association in Victoria. And it is more aimed at doing photography for display or exhibition, but the premises and the ideas behind it are universal. There is no reason why you can't just, as I say, use your smartphone or a tablet to take photographs in a well-lit area. This is just here as a little bit of extra support and advice should you want it. I won't play it now. So these are the sort of photographs that you might want to consider taking. Justine, I hope some of these look familiar. So these are shots to give an overview of the scope of your collection. So these are taken from Heritage Quay, where Justine and I were both at not long ago for an event. Just to give you an idea of the amount that they have in store. So if somebody says, well, I want to just really get a feel for the collection, these are the sorts of shots that you might want to consider taking. These might be appropriate to send to your peer reviewer when you first send your significance paperwork, so that it sort of sits alongside, so it paints that picture when they're looking through your collection listing or collection spreadsheet database, whatever you're able to send them, they can then look at these pictures and go, okay, right, I've got a feel and an understanding for the collection. You might want to take shots of display cases. So this is a community project that I work with down here in Brighton, all around the Second World War and the home front. So we've just snapped our display cases as a record, but they would work very well for this peer review virtual visit, just to show how things are displayed at the moment, how you're currently grouping items, because sometimes understanding how items are grouped and interpreted currently can help the peer reviewer understand your collection more, or they might say, well, actually, you could add another item to that grouping, or did you know there's a subgroup within the group that you've arranged them in? You may want to consider these other themes that you've not looked at already. So it's giving them an idea of how you're working with your collection. And then that allows them to then provide that extra layer of knowledge and experience from their perspective. You might want to use photographs to show the condition of items. So moving away from those sort of overall shots, this is one of my favourite items in our Take Shelter collection, which is a cigarette album looking at ARP duties. But as you can see, it's got a little bit of water damage on the front, it's got a little bit of creasing, and there's a little bit of rust staining where the staples have gone in. It may be that your peer reviewer is interested in sort of the condition of your collection, and maybe some of that information might not be noted in your collection listing. But by sending the photographs, you can send all that information without having to add all that information in for every item in your collection. And as you can see, what I've tried to do with all these photographs of individual items, you can see that I have put in the unique identifier, so the TS 2024-103 for that item, and then a really brief description and one line highlighting the condition. Reviewers might be interested in how objects are grouped. And how sort of the scope of things within subsections. So this is another collection that I work with outside of Sporting Heritage. This is from the Museum of Army Music, and these are some of our woodwind instruments. So as you can see, they're beautifully packed in boxes at the moment. And then I've taken a close-up of some of the sort of the mechanisms for each of them. So your peer reviewer might be interested in groups of items if they're not on display. What, you know, how are you storing them? How have you got them grouped? Is that everything? And actually, I can tell you in this box, there's a whole second layer of woodwind underneath. So I think if I was sending this to a peer reviewer, I would photograph both layers and say, this is the extent of our collection. And I hope you can see from this and from some of the films that we'll look at later on in today's session that so far, with the exception of possibly the cigarette card album, I've not had to get any items particularly out of boxes. I've literally lifted the top off this box. So far, everything that we've produced has been fairly quick to arrange. The other way to send photographs through would be if you've got things on your collection listing that all from the descriptions you've got on your listing all sound very similar. So again, looking at our Take Shelter home front collection, we have 3 Second World War battle dress blouses, which are sort of these tunics that you can see here. They're all very similar, but you can see from the detail, they are actually individual and very separate items. They're actually from 3 separate regiments. But it may be that it's useful for your peer reviewer to see the difference if your descriptions are all looking quite similar. It depends how detailed your collection listings are, and it's easier once you're going through the significance process and once you're working with your peer reviewer, it will be much quicker, as I say, to send a photograph through that can communicate that information than you having to sit down and add extra information into your collection listing or collection database that details all the differences between very similar items. You can also use this approach if you're wanting to show maker's marks, or if you've got hallmarking on trophies or engraved names on trophies. If you've got things like, I know when we were at Heritage Quay recently, they had an exhibition around the women in rugby league, and they had a signed rugby league ball. So if your peer reviewers wanted to look at some of the, if you've got signed kit and equipment, sending a photograph of the overall item and then some close-ups of some of the key signatures might be a really quick and immediate way to communicate that information about your collection. So that's a brief overview of how we might use photographs. Films, again, there are a variety of options to do this. And I think I will prove greatly that you do not need to be an excellent filmmaker to make films for your peer reviewers. So the options are that we've included in this session: pre-recorded films with or without voiceovers, a PowerPoint slide deck recorded on Zoom with a voiceover. So I'll show you an example of this, but this would, again, is a variation on the pre-recorded film idea. Or if you're feeling confident enough and you have the time capacity and can line up your availability with your peer reviewers, you could set up a live session if you're able to if you've got enough Wi-Fi in either your galleries or in your store areas. You could set it up either through Zoom or through WhatsApp video, where you can do a walk round and they can ask different things about the collection as you're sort of showing the items live. It depends what you're most comfortable doing and what is going to be the best use of your time and your peer reviewers' time. So to give you a few examples, before we move on to the examples, I just wanted to show you these two films here. So as I say, I will show you some of the films that I've recorded. They were very much my first go, and to show you sort of the standard that you might want to start at and possibly improve on. But if you are looking at guidance for filming your collections, we ran a digital stories project a number of years ago that produced these two supporting films. Again, I'm not going to play them now, but they are embedded in the slide deck. So there's guidance on how to film items in your collection, and then guidance on how to do a light bit of video editing using OpenShot, which is one of the free film editing software packages that are out there. Other alternative packages that have free membership levels, you could look at CapCut or Canva, depending on what you might use. But if you watch the OpenShot one with David Mansell from the National Football Museum, the principles, if you're new to video editing and want to edit some of the films that you make before you send them to your peer reviewer, the principles that he will show you will be fairly universal across other editing packages. If you're wanting to take it one step further and try and have a go at creating a virtual tour, these are, from a little bit of research, these came out as the top ways to do it. Panoe, I must admit, I've not used these myself, but I have watched a number of other people doing it. It will require an investment of time in learning how to use the software. So if you're not already familiar with video editing, I would maybe say don't necessarily leap into Panoe unless you've got the time and capacity to do it. And to set up your virtual tour, you need to be able to take 360-degree images, and you can do that in Polycam. Again, it's not something I've used personally, but it's something I've seen recommended, having done a little bit of research. So that's sort of, if you're wanting to do a sort of an immersive tour of your collection or museum. But it is no way a requirement for your virtual visit. It's just showing you the different options that you might want to consider. So these are a couple of films that I took last week when I was up at the Museum of Army Music. I'm just going to play them. You can see by the size and shape of them that I took them just using my iPhone. And I will play them just to give you an idea. So this is just a walk down one of the shelves in our store that's got brass instruments on. This is one of our more unusual instruments. It's a serpent. So and we have two of those. So I just sort of stopped and gave a better view of those. So as you can see, I'm not a proficient filmmaker, but I'm hoping that that would give a bit more information and a bit more detail to a peer reviewer. It may be that they watch that and say, oh, actually, I'd like to see that instrument in a little bit more detail. Could you either send me more photos, or could we set up a film that just looks at, say, the serpent or one of the other brass instruments? And I did a similar thing with our painted drums. So I'll just show you this one. And again, it's just to give the peer reviewer a better idea rather than just looking at, a couple of lines of detail within your collection listing. We're fortunate that, as you can see from both the drums and our brass instruments, that we have items on open display, or open storage rather. So again, I've not had to get any of the items off the shelf. I've not had to get any items out of boxes. So it works particularly well for this sort of storage. It may be that your collection is not stored in that way, and you may need to, spend more time getting items out. So they were pre-recorded films. I literally just recorded them on my smartphone. I made them particularly short because I knew we were going to show them within this hour's webinar, but you could make longer ones depending on how much of your collection you wanted to show. But remember, it's not meant to take up a huge amount of your time, and it's not meant to take up a huge amount of your peer reviewers' time. So just be mindful, you don't need to create, a really lengthy piece of film. Let me just get the slide deck to move on and not. This is a version with a voiceover. So I just did a trial voiceover over the painted drums film that we've just seen. Now, what I did is I uploaded the film onto a private YouTube channel, and then I played it through Zoom. I just set up a Zoom meeting where I recorded myself, and then I just downloaded that Zoom recording. So for the purposes of this webinar, I uploaded it back onto YouTube so that I could share it with you, but you could just share it straight from Zoom. So this is that same drums walkthrough, but with a little bit of a voiceover over the top. Here we have an overview of the painted drum collection from the Museum of Army Music. These side drums represent a range of regiments from the British Army. They are complete with their cap badges and their battle honours on each. You will see that there is some loss across the top and the bottom edges of the drums where they have been painted and then used, showing the wear and tear. We have a similar collection of bass drums to accompany these side drums. Most of them date from the 20th century, although there are some late 19th century additions. If you want to see the details in more with more time, you can replay this video at half speed or slower. We definitely won't be watching any of those videos there. So I'll just move our slide deck on. Oh. Right. Oh, before we start that one. So it's worth noting that if you do upload things onto YouTube, to make sure that you set them up as private or unlisted so that you can just share them with your peer reviewer. It's a great way of sharing, and we will talk about sharing a little bit later in the session. But it does also allow your peer reviewers to play them back at different speeds, which I think you probably can do in other applications, but I know that you can particularly do in YouTube. So they can pause it and play it back much more slowly if they want to look at detail. This, moving away from things that were in open storage, I wanted to show you an example of some of the archive and how you might want to show archive material. And again, this is all just to give you ideas about how things might work in your collection, or how you might take this idea and improve on it so that you can give a better visual representation for your peer reviewers. So this is looking at one of our archive boxes at the Museum of Army Music. You'll be pleased to know there's no more voiceover from me. So we have a run of these boxes. We have one for every regiment in the British Army, and then other military music organisations. So we've got over 100 of these. So these would be a significant part of any collection listing that we shared with a peer reviewer. So again, I'm not really getting anything out. I think that would be the second stage of a peer reviewer wanted to actually look at some of the types of documentation in there. But hopefully they can read the post-it notes if they were to pause or slow the film down and just see the sorts of information and the quality of the items that we have in our archive, which, to be absolutely fair, is very, very mixed. We have a lot of photocopied material, we have a lot of handwritten notes, we have items that are taken from other publications but not annotated or credited, and then we have original items like lots of programs and adverts for bands playing in different places. So it's trying to give an idea that we've got this real mixed collection, and we've got, you know, over 100 boxes that reflect that quality of an archive. And then finally, I think this is my final film. Yes, this is my final film to show you. Is looking at how you could use a film to show detail. So these are some of my favourite things in our collection, which we don't get out very often. And we have hundreds of them. So you can see I'm in a store with bright overhead lights. So I'm trying to adjust the little plastic bags so that you don't get too much reflection on them. Then I think, oh, I could actually get him closer to the camera so a peer reviewer could see the quality of the model soldiers that we have. And again, I'm not actually having to get anything out of its wrapping. So, you know, if I was to do this for public consumption, you know, I would approach looking at the collections very differently. But from just trying to convey information to the peer reviewer, I'm hoping that that will be a sufficient level of detail. But I think you always need to be open that they might come back and say, oh, actually, can you show me, you know, an example of something from your archive, or can you show me that outside of its packaging and wrapping? But I think they are a reasonable sort of array and different sort of ways that you might want to use films. And I say you can use a mixture of films and photographs. So moving on. So things to consider. Particularly if you're going to film, when is the best time to film? I don't know if you noticed on that first film when we were looking at the brass instruments, you could hear a plane flying over the top because we're on an army base and there's lots of military action going on around us. That's not too intrusive, but if you've got other visitors or other members of staff or meetings taking place or music being played, so it's working out when is the best time for you to film. It may mean coming in early, it may mean staying after hours. Hopefully, if you're only creating short films, this won't add a huge amount to your workload. If you're filming display cases, how will you mitigate against the reflection? It's very hard if you've ever tried to film or photograph through glass cases or through frames. So it's just thinking about how you might do that ahead of time. Can you open the cases? Again, you might need to do that when you're not open to the public. If you're in the stores, as you saw when I was showing those model soldiers, we've got big, bright strip lights in our store, as is not uncommon with lots of storage spaces. But can you turn overhead lights off so that you're minimizing any of that sort of reflection without you having to set up a big sort of photography or filming setup? Think about those sort of really basic low-cost things that you can do. We would recommend recording a test video. I would definitely class what I've included in today's webinar as test videos. I would make those, send them to the peer reviewers and say, this is the sort of information I could share with you. Is this sufficient? And if they come back and say, oh, actually, I'd like you to pause longer on each item, or I'd like to, that looks fine, but can you actually film them from the other side so I can see the other side of the instruments? It's knowing, rather than you sort of doing it all and handing it over as a finished package and then they come and ask for more information, it's worth doing essentially a pilot and sharing that information with them. It's also worth considering that what might be useful for one peer reviewer might be useful for another. So this goes back to that idea that we talked about at the beginning of the session of talking to the peer reviewers about what their needs might be. So it may be that you make some virtual visit material that is useful for everybody. That's a great use of your time. If you can make one or two films, do a selection of photographs that are good for everybody. And then if peer reviewers come back and ask for extra details, then there's less sort of individual separate work that needs to be done. So do think about how you can create those economies of scale. So sharing your virtual visit assets, I've already talked about how I've put some of those films on our YouTube channel, but they are listed as, I think they're unlisted as opposed to private. You don't necessarily want, as I say, these assets are not meant to be for public consumption, and you may not want to show the details of what you have in store. So for photographies, presentations and films, the obvious option is using some form of cloud storage so you can upload them and then your peer reviewer can access them as and when you need to, particularly if you've got materials that you're going to share with a number of peer reviewers. Uploading them once would be a great sort of sensible use of time. It depends what you use within your organisation as to which cloud storage you choose. And I say for films, we have a YouTube channel. They're free to set up. You can set all your films to be unlisted or private, and you can just share the links. You can then also use those to share within Zoom. If you do the idea of having a film that you then add a voiceover to later, you might want to do the filming first and then consider what you're going to say. Sometimes it's quite hard to film and talk at the same time. It depends, how confident you are and how much time you want to spend doing the preparation. You may want to get your filming done quickly and then spend a little bit of time afterwards creating what you might say over the top, and putting it back through Zoom and doing a recording that way is a good way of doing that. There are other ways of doing all of these options. So this is by no means a completely sort of exhaustive list, but for us, we thought they were the easiest to access and free to access for as many organisations as possible without having to learn, as I say, a whole raft of new skills. If your peer reviewers are unable to access things through cloud storage, or for any reason you're not allowed to upload things onto YouTube, you can obviously send things through WeTransfer or save it onto a USB stick and stick things in the post. I would imagine that the assets that you will create will probably be larger than what you could email in one go. So you may want to email items in batches, but I would recommend, if you can go down the cloud storage route, as I say, if you can upload things once and then just allow peer reviewers access to it, you're not then having to manage their access to the things that you've created, and it gives them a lot more independence and frees up your time. So we're going to pause in a moment just to have a little bit of a discussion, but so we've got about 15 minutes left of today's session. So I hope I've proved quite heartily that I'm not a proficient filmmaker, and I'm a fairly average photographer. But what I've provided would add extra information to any peer review process. But as I say, I'm open that if a peer reviewer came back and said, oh, actually, can you show me the reverse of that? Can you show me a little bit of detail? I've seen your brass. Can you show me some of more of the woodwind or some of your percussion, when I'm thinking about the music collection? So it may be the same, that you may find that it's a slightly iterative process. Obviously, you don't want a huge amount of backwards and forwards, because that's going to take up your time and also eat into the time that your peer reviewer has. But I'm hoping that I've shown that it could be manageable. So just before we pause to have a little bit of discussion towards the end of the session, I just wanted to draw your attention to the last session in our series, which will be in a fortnight's time. So this one is slightly different to our first four. So as I said at the beginning, it's how you might want to come in and be a peer reviewer, as opposed to being the organisation that is producing all the significance paperwork. All the other recordings from our sessions are up on our YouTube and on our website through the links there. And as always, I always end by saying, have a look at the resources on our toolkit. That's where all the measuring significance paperwork is. And follow us across our socials for new things that are going on. Before we pause for discussion, Justine, is there anything you would like to add in that I've not covered? I feel like I've rattled.
So I think so. I think that's been brilliant and a really good demonstration that this doesn't have to be all bells and whistles, but you can still produce a really good outcome for your peer reviewers in a way that will be straightforward for you. Yeah, love the films. I play instruments, so I'm like looking at those going, oh, this is great.
You're welcome to come to the Museum of Army Music anytime. I have a large
but really, no, it's brilliant, and it really helps because you can see how it brings alive for the peer reviewers who are otherwise looking at just a very straightforward like an inventory and a list, and sometimes there's not always that much information on there, but they may pick up from just looking at those images. So much more of the collection, or it might trigger them to ask you more questions, but it's not taking lots and lots of time. So yeah.
Good. I'm just going to pick up on Teresa's question first off. There we are. So, recording devices. So a Zoom recorder, I think this is the one that you're referring to, Teresa, is an oral history. It's an audio recorder that quite often is one of the most popular ones that people use for oral history recordings. So if you wanted to record audio on that, you could. But I would say, for the purposes of this, I would just record either straight into a computer, a tablet, or a phone, because otherwise you'll have to add that sound recording, because a Zoom recorder for oral history will give you a WAV file. You would then need to add that into any film or photographs, unless you send it as you could send it as a separate sound file if you wanted to, but it would only record sound on its own. So it's confusing that Zoom audio recorder has got that name, as well as obviously the video conferencing software that we use. So for our sort of final 10 minutes or so, I just wanted to have a discussion with everybody just to see, do you think that would be, would you feel confident to set up a virtual visit for your collection? And if so, do you think you could take any of the ideas that we've looked at today? What would work for you? What wouldn't work for you? Yeah, I sort of throw it out to the floor, really. Who would like to jump in? Has anybody done anything like this before and shared your collection, either for research or for any other sort of reasons where you might want to produce something that isn't necessarily for public consumption?
Teresa, you nearly. There we go.
Yeah, Teresa,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you in a minute, because you keep coming off.
I'm dithering. I'm dithering. So we haven't done anything that was kind of for peer reviewers as such, but my colleague did take some photographs, and they are actually on the website where we've looked at things. So we have sort of gone to have a look at material to think about what might be quite representative. But we haven't thought about, okay, if we were going to try and represent a selection from every single bit of the collection, I think that would be a really good thing to do. And we could do that anyway, even if we haven't got any peer reviewers to share it with, because then it's there when we have.
It's that idea of trying to double up. If you're producing it for one purpose, it's thinking about those other applications that you could use it for. So
yes.
I'm a great fan of, if you're gonna. I've often worked with museums who said, "Oh, we're just going to photograph the collection," and they do it very sort of quickly. And I was like, "Well, no, actually, if you spend a little bit more time just thinking about the other applications for it, just by putting everything on a plain background, suddenly then you could put, like you say, you could put it on your website, you could put it on, you could share it for more sort of official, inquiries, those sorts of things. You've got something that's a little bit more usable." But yeah, because I think I know you've got your background blurred out at the moment, but obviously you've got racks and racks of shelving, I would imagine, where you are.
Oh, I'm in the office at the moment.
Oh,
this is not where the collection is, no.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's something we would definitely look at, photographing more of the content.
And it may be that a peer reviewer won't need to see everything. So if you're doing it anyway, that's great. But it may be that a peer reviewer will come back and just ask for different selections. So with the virtual visit, you don't have to show your whole collection. It's where their interests lie.
Yes.
Very well. So it's not meant to be suddenly this whole encompassing task for you to have to do, because
no, indeed,
to come and say that, oh yes, well actually just go and photograph everything you've got, or even in groups, it's an unrealistic thing to ask people to do. But if you're thinking about doing it, it's worth thinking about how that might then work for peer reviewers. Malcolm or Rebecca, how would this process work for either of you?
On the spot.
I'm going to be honest. I assume this will be virtual visit for the public, so I may have come to the wrong thing. We are entirely not in the significant review stage currently. I don't know if we haven't really have any peers we can review with closest to the local museum Tully. Uh, um, the videos are certainly an interesting thing. I hadn't um thought about that for a virtual visit.
So do you think if somebody came and asked about some of the things you might have either in store or on display, some of those ideas that we've looked at in today's session, would
That'd be really good because
they'd be manageable
I
for
know
you?
I know we have some people that are interested, but maybe can't make it to the
Mm.
archive we have. So that would certainly be
Remind me
interesting.
which collection you're with?
Carlisle Heritage Group.
Oh, of course.
We're a group of volunteers.
Mhm.
So I, I don't know what I'm doing. They know what they're doing, but I don't. Um, um, but we've currently got an exhibition on, and it would be interesting if we could somehow put that exhibition online for people who can't make it.
Yeah, so you can capture that exhibition in a way that, but yeah, you can share with people who can't actually make that exhibition, but then it could become part of your sort of research assets.
Yes.
If further down the line, once the exhibition's closed, you might want to share some of those with people who might want to come and either research your collection or as part of the significance process. And you may say you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but we're all learning all the time. I mean,
Okay.
this has been a massive learning process for us as an organization, hasn't it, Justine? Just working out how to support organizations and how as an organization ourselves we would work through the significance process. And as I said at the beginning of this session, this idea around the virtual visit wasn't something that was undertaken by the three museums in the initial pilot, but was definitely shown up as a gap that would be useful. So this is very much us saying this is how you could set it up, but it's still something that we're testing. Oh, Malcolm, I understand. Yes, you're without camera and microphone. Well, has anybody got any other comments before I draw the session to a close?
One thing that you did point out was the glare you get from cabinets. Do you have any tips on how to combat that? Because that's an issue we're having, especially with something that is shiny and like a trophy or something that's reflects
Oh,
the light.
yeah. Shiny things through reflective glass are probably a photographer's sort of worst combination. If there's any way of photographing them outside of the case, I would say that would be, the easiest option. The other way is I've seen photographers use, large expanses of black fabric. So you try and minimize, so the reflection that's reflecting into the glass is actually something that's very neutral and dark, so that then there's less reflection. Obviously turning off overhead lights, but you will need a light source to be able to photograph with. Ideally that's not a flash, because that will bounce off your glass. I would recommend probably having a look around on somewhere like YouTube for photographers' tricks, because there are lots of people who do those how-to videos. But I think it's sort of trial and error. And as I say, I've seen there's a photographer we use quite a lot with a number of the museums I work with, and he comes with big sort of black fabric setups so that he can block out our horrible strip lights in our stores, but then control the lighting so that he gets the right exposure without the light bouncing off either the shiny item or the glass, either in a frame or in a display case. So I would start there.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And yeah, if anybody has a go at setting up a virtual visit, we'd be really interested to know how you get on, what you felt worked well, what the feedback from your peer reviewers might have been, whether you do it this week, next month, next year. Do let us know, because this is an ongoing piece of work for us as an organisation. I'll draw the session to a close there. So thank you so much for coming to today's session. And I hope to see some of you at our final one in a fortnight's time. This recording will be edited and will be up on our YouTube channel and our website within the next sort of week to 10 days. And I'll send everybody a link along with the slide deck, which had all those embedded how-to videos around filming and photography. And you can rewatch my fantastic efforts at filming the different collections I've been working with. So thank you, Justine, for your input. Is there anything you'd like to say before we finish?
No, thank you, Fran. Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, I really loved seeing how you looked at the different items. And for me, I think it just really helps to demonstrate how important this could be to peer reviewers or anybody else trying to access a collection that can't actually be there. So yeah, thank you.
It's a start, hopefully. Right, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Hope to see everybody soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.